2 months ago, I ceased to live. I died. I disappeared from the world. For that period, my consciousness had been severed, and I merely drifted around the universe as an object, and not as an actor. I feared being alive. I feared having to face my continuing problems. So instead, I viewed them as an outsider, glaring into my own life as an encapsulated snow globe, unchanging and forever stable. There's some things a story can't encapsulate. Stories are inherently biased. We like to hear the stories of winners and not losers. So, we're taught to fear the losing odds and to prey on the winning odds. So as I tell the following story, take it with a grain of salt and imagine the opposite. It's a fake mic, by the way. It was the July of 1983, and a Jamaican fishing boat was heading for a remote island. It was a group of adventurous souls who, in protest, had taken mutiny and steered the ship away from their routine routing and towards untrackable grounds.
There were a total of 7 men on that ship. And after having been on the boat for 16 hours, the sun was beginning to set. And when night hit, it was one of the worst storms that had been. Waves would hit the ships, and some of the waves would be high enough to wash a person in. So, in the chaos of the night, all of the people scrambled to take shelter in the bridge of the ship, closing all the doors as all the water washed around on the deck. All except for one person. One person who decided to go to the roof of the ship and to grasp onto either side of the roof, clinging desperately onto life, belly laid flat and face looking down. No one had even noticed that he was even there. I mean, they were all frantically trying to keep track of themselves and not get swept off into the ocean. So he was there, and no one knew.
When night passed, all of them had survived. And when they went around to check numbers, everyone had replied, including the guy on the roof. He had not retreated from his position and instead had stayed there, clinging onto the roof. But no one really had the energy at that point to remove him, so they left him be. The waves of the night had not killed them. What it did instead was it scrambled their sense of direction. And not knowing how to navigate, they all began to panic, trying desperately to turn the ship back. But unfortunately, at this point, they were already in the Bermuda Triangle, and all their navigation tools no longer worked. Testing. Wait, what the An overwhelming sense of anxiety overtook the ship as the sun rose. That day happened to be the hottest of the year. No cloud coverage, no breeze, just direct, excruciating sunlight. The crew tried to hide from the heat, first by blocking the sun, hiding in the shade, or by using the ice in their fish cooler. However, as the sun began to induct onto the white painted steel, it all began to reflect, and no matter where one stood on the ship, it felt as if they were in an infinite sauna, inhaling the fiery air of the labyrinth. Not being able to see an end to their travel and being physically overwhelmed and frustrated by the heat, some of them became manic. They scratched incessantly at themselves. A few men began howling and screaming. Others banged their heads against the boat. Soon the screaming and yelling had become tears, and in time the seamen had all crumpled to the ground, holding onto their heads and their last strands of sanity. Something had happened that compelled all of them to look up. A certain glimmer in the ocean. A type of hope. The water had looked so cool on this certain portion of the sea, and it was no longer waving with induction, but instead shining. As the seamen leant over the railing to get a closer look, what they saw in the water was not their reflections, but a glimmer into their future, a look at their loved ones, and a vision of a future of infinite satisfaction and comfort. The water was quite the distance below them, yet it was so alluring. Without thought, the first fisherman had jumped in, then the second, and then the third, and soon all of them were in the ocean, pleased and infinitely satisfied with their being. In short, it was jellyfish that they were looking at, and they had all died except for the man desperately clinging on to life on the roof of that ship. He had felt the excruciating heat too, but in his mind he clung on to some desperate hope that he would see his mother once more, or maybe his lover, or perhaps drink with his middle school friends again, maybe even get into a bar fight. By some semblance, hope had belly within him, and despite being plastered against the boiling steel, it had no longer bothered him. He lived. In our story here, he was not struck by lightning, he did not drift into the unknown, he didn't die of dehydration, or not get rescued, because he lived to tell the tale. He's a biased survivor that today we can stage as a symbol of hope, because if the unfortunate had happened to him, the moral of the story would be warped, and we would be taught to fear the odds and not to believe in the odds. As I stared into that snow globe of my life, the randomness of the world had hit me. In the reflection of the snow globe, a divine character pulsating with life approached from behind. The character beckoned me to live again, to experience all of life's faults and beauties, its random imperfections and perfections. Once again, I began to believe the odds, and as my ego faded away, I could feel myself absorbed back into the universe with all the agency I once had. I felt alive again. I turned around. It was my mother approaching me with a spatula in hand, ready to beat my ass. I'm too young to be cynical.
Lord and veil, they do them nights turn. Burn candles by the dust tonight. So fire, sheer energy release. Melt the heart, mind, star voice, car, fun, wax. You get relaxed.